Hello! Today we're going to take a look at how to set up reoccurring events on a SharePoint calendar. This is something you can't do in SharePoint normally. When you set up the calendar, you can create events one at a time. Often I have customers ask me, how do I set up reoccurring events? That's something you can do very easily in Outlook. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can set up a function that allows your users to copy events. So they can set up that event to run weekly or monthly or yearly, and for however many times they need to do it. We're going to be doing some Power Automate workflow and use the first selected item trigger. We're going to go through the whole example in this video. I think you'll find it useful and you can set this up in your own SharePoint environment. So now, let's get SharePoint smart. Here I am back in my SharePoint site, and we're going to go through all the steps. So I'm going to begin by going to Site Contents, and I'm going to create a very simple list for our purposes. So in order to create a calendar, you need to first have a list. So I'm going to call this Sales Calendar just for an example for practice, and create. And I'm just going to put in a couple of basic fields here. So by default, of course, every SharePoint list has the title field. We'll use that. And then I'm going to go ahead and add date time columns. This will be for the start and end. So I'm going to do one called start, and we will include the time with that. And we'll go ahead and make that required and save. And then one more column for the end, in case this is like an hour meeting or something like that. So I'm going to do another date time, and this is going to simply be called end. I will include time, and I will make this required and save. Okay, and then I next want to go ahead and create my calendar view. So every SharePoint list, of course, has the all items view. We need to create a new view, and that's going to give us this calendar option. Okay, and I'm just going to call this calendar. Why not? And then it asks me the start and end date. You have to match those up. So that's easy. I just go ahead and pick start and end, and that's good. Title on the calendar, title, that's fine. Everything is good. So very simple step so far. Now just for dummy purposes, I'm going to add some test events, that kind of thing, just so we're kind of prepared to do some testing when we're ready. So I'm going to go ahead and put a new event in for Friday, and we'll go ahead and call this Cinco de Mayo party. Okay, we'll say that's tomorrow, and we'll say that's going to be at 4 o'clock p.m. and ending tomorrow at 5 o'clock p.m. Okay, this is just for practice. We're going to be making some copies of this in just a moment. Okay, so here is the problem, or a challenge, I guess you could say, in SharePoint. There is no option in the command bar or anything tied to this calendar that lets us have a reoccurring event. And that is the problem that we're going to solve in this session. So we're going to now focus on Power Automate. So I'm going to go into Power Automate, and I'm going to do a new flow. I'll pick Automated, and just click skip on the first screen. And we need a particular type of trigger, and it's called for a selected item. There it is, SharePoint for selected item. That is precisely what we want. And now we're going to do some more setup in Power Automate. So of course I need to select the site that I'm working in. It's this one, and I need to select that list that I just created, which is called Sales Calendar. There it is. Okay, and now I have input. So this is super handy. What we're going to have is an interface where the user has the ability to pick whether they want an event to repeat daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. So now we're going to go ahead and set up those options. So I just need to click Add an Input, and we'll pick Text. Now you'll notice there isn't a choice option here, and you might think you can't do that, but in fact if you pick Text, there is an option if you go to the extra settings, and you can make this a drop-down list of options, and that's what we want to do in this situation. So I'm going to go ahead and put in time span, and then in the next part, this is just to prompt the user. I'm going to go ahead and put select in all caps, and then I can go ahead and put in my options. Now in this part, you do want to make sure that you put in your options exactly as you see me doing it here. This is going to correlate to a function that we're going to use later, which helps our workflow know how to do the math to increment the time period. So make sure it matches precisely. So the options are going to be day, week, month, or year with a capital letter beginning each one. Make sure those are just like that. And then this is going to be required. Make sure that you have it set as required. And it is, notice it says make this field optional. I don't want it optional. I just want it required. And then we need one other user input. So I'm just going to click that. And we need a number. This is the number of repeats. So if I say I want this to repeat daily, well, how many times? Or I want this to repeat each week. How many weeks do you want this duplicated? So that's the purpose of the second field. And I can just simply call it count. And then here where it says please enter number, I don't really need all that. I can just put a number sign, and that's perfectly fine. So that's fine. Now we're ready to move on to the next step, and we're going to need to initialize a variable. On search, just type init, and you'll see this option, Initialize Variable, towards the top of the results. And I'm going to call my variable loop counter. And you're going to see why I'm naming that in just a moment. And then this, of course, is an integer, and we'll start it with the value initialized at 0. And I like to name my flow blocks accordingly, so I'm going to say initialize variable loop counter, just to make it a little more specific. And now we're ready to go on to the next step. Now the next thing we need to do, in fact, is get the item. If I don't get this item, I won't have the properties that I need. So that's our next order of business. So in here, just do get item. Note that we are not using the get items, we're just getting the single item, the selected item which triggered the flow. So I do get item, and then I'm going to pick that site address once again, and then pick list view, and then select the list. Remember that was called sales calendar. So I just need to find it. I've got lots of lists in my site, and then just pass along the ID for a selected item. There we go. That's fine. We can just leave that as is. And now we're going to get to the more interesting part of our workflow. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is a loop. We're going to do something called a do until loop. All right, so you can close down your block just to make things cleaner to look at. And I'm going to type do until. And there it is at the top of the list. And then it's going to ask me for some options. So now this variable that we initialized is going to come into play. We're going to use that in our loop counter. And we're going to say when the loop counter do until the loop counter is equal to count. So the user is going to enter a value for the count. So I'm going to go ahead and select count. I just type that in the search and it says for a selected item. That's what the user's giving us. They're going to say, I want this 4 times or 10 times or 52 times. It's going to loop through based on that number. Okay, and then now we're in this loop. We can go ahead and do our actions. You don't need to do anything else with the advanced motor change limits. You just need to do it like this. And the first thing I want to do is increment that variable. Remember that it's starting at 0. So if I type increment, there it is. It's the first option. And we just need to reference that variable called loop counter. And we want to increment it by 1. So the first time it goes through, it'll bump that up to 1. And now we're ready to work with our date time information. Okay, so we need to do a special operation for times. So I'm going to go to that now. So this is called add to time. There it is. And then our base time, we're referencing the value of the start. So I want to go in here and type start. And then that will be the get item start value. And then just to make things easy, I'll kind of do this simultaneously. I'm going to add another add to time block down here. Okay, and let's do add to time end. I want these to be named in a distinct way so that we don't get confused in our later steps. So this would be add to time start. Okay, and this of course is going to be using the end value. There it is. Okay, the interval, this is the value provided to us by the user. Or no, I'm sorry, that's the time unit. I got confused for a second. This is provided by the user, but it's in our loop counter. So this is going to continue to increment as we go forward. So I just need to reference the loop counter variable in both situations. Okay, so if you picture this, it's going through the loop. The first time it's 1, then it's 2, then it's 3, and it's just going to keep increasing that each time it goes through the loop. And then we have the time unit. Now, by default, it's giving me a drop down, but we've collected this information from the user. We're going to populate that dynamically. In fact, what we want to do is custom value, and we're going to pick time span. There it is, and that's going to fill in for us. That's the value that the user provided. So do custom value, time span. There it is. All right, now we've done all our work to prepare, so our next step is going to be actually creating the copies of our event. So we need a create item option. There it is, SharePoint create item. Okay, once again, I need to browse to my site. It is this one, and I need to do that list, which was called sales calendar. That's where we're creating our copies. There we go. And there's our fields, and it's a copy. The title is going to be identical, so that one is just referencing back from the trigger. So if I type title, it's from get item, that's correct. And then, of course, the start and end change. That's what we just prepared in these previous blocks. And so, lucky for us, our life is nice and easy now. So end is going to be add to time end, and start is going to be add to time start. Okay, we're ready to save. And what you will need to do is modify your workflow to give it run permissions to your user group. So one easy way to do that is just to give permissions to everybody who has access to this calendar. So you've got users and groups. You can certainly provide access that way. Alternatively, you can do it this way. I can select the site and the list and just say that I want those people to have access. So just something to make note of. Of course, you want to open up this functionality. If you don't do that, it will mean that this option is only going to appear for yourself. All right, let me do a refresh on my calendar page. Okay, in order to invoke that command, you do need to select the event. I've got it now selected. Notice in the command bar it says one selected. And once I've done that, if I go in the Power Automate menu, you're going to see your option pop up. Sometimes it will take a little bit of time to propagate. So let me do a refresh. It's kind of giving me a weird UI. I know exactly what the problem is. I did something silly. Let's go back to flow for a second. I have a really bad name for my flow. I need to call that copy event. I could not for the life of me figure out why I had that long name. So this is what shows up in the user interface. So let's go ahead and give it a friendly name so that we don't have a crazy looking option in our SharePoint menu. Okay, and now we should get more user-friendly copy event option instead of all that gobbledygook that it showed us just a moment ago. There, that's more like it. Okay, so I just want to make sure I have it selected, my event, and then I can come over and the sidebar will open up. And now you'll see how those input options work. The first time you run the workflow, it's going to ask for confirmation, but after that you won't see that again. So there's the time span. All right, so let's do each of the different scenarios. So let's start out with, let's copy that for the next 2 days. So I'll do run flow, and it just notifies us that it started the event. Should run pretty quickly, and there you go. We've got 2 copies of Cinco de Mayo party. We're going to see a lot of copies before we get done because we're going to do testing. Okay, and so I'll just delete those. Sure, delete it. Okay, let's try the other options just to make sure everything works the way that we expect it to. I'm going to go now to Automate and Copy Event, and this time let's pick for weekly. So pick week, and we'll do for the next 2 weeks, run flow. There we go. There we go, 2 more Cinco de Mayos. Those are going to be on May 12 and May 19. You can see that the times are all exactly as we expect, and it is an exact duplicate of those. So let me delete those now. And the next one we'll do is month. So let's go to copy event, and we'll go to that option. So we go month, and let's do 2 months, run the flow. And what we expect is to see a June 5th and July 5th copy of those events. So if I go to that, there is Cinco de Mayo on June 5th, and then also again on July 5th, so we know that's working. Now you may have a question. How does it deal with months that have different numbers of days? Well, of course, you know, for days 1 to 28 in the calendar, you don't have much of an issue. But this function that we're using that adds time units, it factors that in. So as an example, if you do the last day of the month and it's May 31st, it'll just put the event on the last day of the month in other months. So it does have some logic which helps it to handle that. So generally speaking, that works pretty well. You can test for yourself. You're going to find that that works pretty well on its own, luckily. It's a nice aspect of that functionality. All right, so I'm just getting rid of these dummies. We just have one last task we want to do. That was the yearly option. So let's do one copy for that. Go into Power Automate, copy event, and this time I'll pick year. So there's the year option, and we'll just do one copy. So that's a simple one. So now I should be able to pan through the calendar and go to May next year, because of course we're going to have another Cinco de Mayo party then. And there it is on May 5th in 2024. All right, we've got all those options set. Now, I'm expecting you may have some questions because there's more things you might want to do with this. You're creating a series of events, if you will, and so some advanced things you might consider would be how to get rid of the series events or update them. That would involve some more advanced workflow. So if you want to have that type of situation, you could do another for a selected item trigger. Another thing you might consider is putting an additional field in your SharePoint list, something like series ID, something where there's a shared value that you could use to query to modify all the events with the same series ID or delete all the same events with the series ID. So that'd be a bit more advanced. Hopefully you'll find just adding this function, which we covered pretty quickly on this web session, will at least get your users the ability to make lots of copies. And then generally speaking, making the deletes isn't too bad. So that's it. We did everything we need to for our calendar. I hope you found that interesting. This was prompted by a couple of customer requests recently where they asked me, how do I make those recurring events? It's a frustration with the SharePoint calendar, and it's just expected by users. It's something you can do easily in a Google Calendar. You can do it easily in Outlook. And so it's natural to expect to be able to copy events and have repeating events in your SharePoint calendar as well. And now you have the answer. You know exactly how to set up a workflow and provide a user-facing options where they can select the event, go to the command bar, pick your special copy event option, and it's simple. They just pick the time interval and how many times they want to have a copy of that. I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you're able to get that set up in your own SharePoint environment, and good luck.